The first time she touched my arm, I thought she had mistaken me for someone else. The second I looked into her terrified blue eyes, I realized she wasn't confused, she was desperate. Her fingers trembled so violently that her boarding pass nearly slipped to the polished floor of Denver International Airport. Without warning, she leaned close and whispered words that changed both of our lives forever. She begged me to act like her husband for the next 40 minutes, and behind her stood a man whose cold stare told me this wasn't some harmless misunderstanding. I had no idea that saying yes would drag me into the most emotional day of my life, one that would teach me the true meaning of courage, sacrifice, and second chances. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change someone's life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. My name is Nathan, and at 38 years old, I had become an expert at loneliness. My wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a long battle with cancer, and since then I buried myself in work as a construction project manager in Colorado. That afternoon, I was waiting for a delayed flight to Seattle, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a heart that had forgotten how to trust happiness. Then a young woman named Rachel appeared out of nowhere, grabbed my arm, and quietly pleaded for help. She didn't tell me everything immediately. She simply slipped her hand into mine and rested her head lightly against my shoulder as though we had spent years together. I could feel her shaking. Across the terminal, a sharply dressed man scanned the crowd with unsettling patience. His expression changed the moment he saw us. His confident stride slowed, and for a few seconds he simply watched. Rachel whispered that the man was her former fiancé. She had escaped an emotionally controlling relationship months earlier, but he refused to let go. He had discovered she was traveling to Chicago to begin a new job and had followed her to the airport. He hadn't threatened her directly that day, but his constant presence, his silent pursuit, and the way he refused to leave her alone had left her terrified. Airport security hadn't seen him break any laws, and she feared confronting him would only make things worse before she boarded. Every instinct told me to walk away from a situation I barely understood, but then I remembered sitting beside my late wife during her final weeks. She often said the world survives because ordinary people choose kindness when it's inconvenient. Those words echoed in my mind as I wrapped my arm gently around Rachel's shoulders. For the next several minutes, we became strangers, pretending to share a lifetime together. We walked through bookstores, stopped for coffee, laughed about imaginary family vacations, and studied departure screens as if discussing holiday plans. Rachel slowly relaxed, but every now and then her smile disappeared whenever she spotted the man watching from a distance. As we talked, fragments of her life emerged. She had grown up in Ohio with loving parents who believed everyone deserved respect. After college, she met a charming entrepreneur named Victor. At first, he showered her with affection, but little by little he isolated her from friends, questioned every decision she made, and convinced her that she couldn't survive without him. It took years before she gathered the courage to leave. Even then, she carried invisible scars that no one could see. Listening to her reminded me of my own grief. Pain wears different faces. Some people lose those they love through illness. Others lose themselves while trying to love the wrong person. Yet both kinds of heartbreak leave people wondering whether tomorrow will ever feel safe again. The 40 minutes felt both endless and incredibly short. The man continued following us from a distance, never approaching close enough to create a scene. Finally, Rachel's boarding group was announced. Relief spread across her face, but before we reached the gate, the man suddenly stepped into our path. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. He looked directly at Rachel, ignoring me completely, and calmly asked her to come with him so they could talk one last time. She froze. I could almost feel fear stealing her voice. Without raising mine, I simply stepped beside her and said she didn't owe anyone another conversation if she didn't want one. The confidence in my words surprised even me. Perhaps grief had taught me that life is too precious to surrender to fear. People nearby noticed the tension. A gate agent looked over, followed by 2 airport security officers making their routine rounds. The man glanced around and realized everyone was watching. Whatever control he believed he still had over Rachel vanished in that moment. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Rachel didn't cry immediately. She waited until we reached the boarding line, then tears rolled silently down her face. She thanked me over and over, saying she finally believed her old life was truly behind her. Before boarding, she hugged me tightly and handed me a folded note. She said not to read it until after her flight had taken off. When my own delayed flight finally departed hours later, I unfolded the paper. Inside was a handwritten message. She wrote that I hadn't simply pretended to be her husband for 40 minutes. I had reminded her what genuine protection looked like without expecting anything in return. She also wrote that somewhere out there was another person carrying invisible pain just like I was, and she hoped I wouldn't spend the rest of my life hiding from joy. At the bottom she had written a single sentence: "Thank you for proving that good men still exist." I stared out the airplane window for most of the flight, thinking about those words. Months passed. Life returned to its familiar rhythm until one snowy December afternoon when I received an unexpected Christmas card. Rachel had somehow found my business address through the airline incident report, where we'd both provided contact information as witnesses. Inside the card was a family photo. She had started her new career, reunited with old friends, volunteered at a shelter for survivors of abusive relationships, and looked happier than the frightened woman I met at the airport. She thanked me one final time for helping her believe in herself again. That Christmas, instead of spending the holiday alone, I accepted an invitation from my sister that I had declined every year since my wife's passing. It wasn't because my grief disappeared. It was because one stranger had reminded me that healing begins the moment we allow kindness back into our lives. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't happen through grand speeches or dramatic rescues. Sometimes they begin with a frightened hand reaching for help in a crowded airport terminal, and another hand choosing not to let go. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes kindness still exists, leave a comment, and subscribe to support more inspiring stories like this. Special request: comment below with the words "Kindness changes lives" if you believe one small act of courage can completely change someone's future. Because in the end, we may never know how deeply one ordinary decision can impact another person's life. A simple choice to stand beside someone during their darkest moment can become the reason they find hope again. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy any of us can leave. Not wealth, not fame, but the quiet memory that when someone desperately needed a friend, we chose compassion over comfort. Sometimes 40 minutes is all it takes to change two lives forever.